Welcome to Page One, the show for writers with the reader in mind. Here's your host, Zita Christian.
Hi everyone, welcome to Page One. I'm Zita Christian. I met tonight's guest at a conference, a writers group, the International Women's Writing Guild. And that is a conference where many women make a writing journey. I'm one of them. So is my guest. Her name is Carren Strock, and her book is called A Writer's Journey. Carren, thanks very much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, A Writer's Journey. Tell us what the book's about.
Well, basically, when I wrote my first book, I knew nothing about writing a book. And a writer's journey goes over all the things that I learned, the mistakes I made, the things I learned how to do, what to do. Basically, the full title is A Writer's Journey, What to Know Before, During, and After Writing a Book.
Well, that says it, doesn't it?
Oh, yes.
You know, that reminds me. We have a common connection, Liz Ailshire, who, dear friend, and a former crew member here on the show. She would teach at the International Women's Writing Guild Conference, as you do, as I do. And Liz would always say, you know, you have to have a 30-second commercial for your book. And you just gave a great one. She would be very proud. She'd be very proud. So, Carren, I want to share with the viewers a portion of a review that I found for your book. And there are a lot of wonderful reviews. This one in particular I liked. And this was from E. Bukowski from Book Lover 10. So listen to this. A writer's journey is effective because Carren Strock tells it like it is. She never underestimates the barriers that can dissuade timid souls from soldiering on when the going gets tough. In addition, she's a wonderful example of a mature woman who made her own luck and was smart enough to learn from her mistakes. She did her homework, put in the necessary hours to revise her work, networked, and did what was necessary to publicize her product. A writer's journey is lucid and inspiring. It is also well organized, informative, and fun to read. Wow. What a great review. I mean, that was just a portion of it. There was much more. But that was typical of the reviews I found for the book. You really have... There are a lot of writing how-to books out there, but you really have come up with a way to provide the information that it's a way that I don't always see in books. And I think the difference for your book, from my perspective, is that you put yourself into it. You're very candid about what went wrong and about what you did to fix it. And one of the other, one of the things I love is you give practical examples. Little steps that people can take to help their chances. Now, you're not ever saying, I guarantee success. But I think that is extremely valuable. So talk to us a little bit about what goes into before you write the book, during the writing of the book, and after. Let's start with before. That seems logical.
I just have to go back for a second.
Okay.
My elevator pitch would be, this is the book I wish I had when I started writing.
Ah, there you go. Excellent.
I never thought I'd write a book because all I could picture were hundreds of pages on a desk and flying all over the place. And I walked into Liz's class, Liz Alshire's class, and she was talking about organization. And she made it sound easy. Each chapter was like a short story in a folder unto itself. Each chapter had index cards. And it's like, once I got past the organization, I could start doing the work. But that doesn't mean it came easily. It was 3.5 years in the writing, and there was a lot of frustration, and a lot of times I put it down and didn't want to pick it up again. Then I went to a meeting. It was a networking group for professional women. And they had us sitting at tables, and just to get to know each other, they'd come up with a topic at the beginning of each session. And one topic was a problem I'm having. And they went around the room, and one woman was looking for housing, one was looking for childcare, somebody was looking for a job. Somebody else was looking for somebody to help her with the flyers for this particular group of women. And I talked about my book, and I said, I just don't have the time to write. and I gave them a little description of the book. And afterward, I said to this woman, her name was Doris, who needed people to help her with flyers, I said, I'll help you. She said, I don't want your help. You have an important book to write. I want you to go home and work on it. And she said, what chapter are you on? I said, I think I'm on chapter 3. She said, well, next month when we meet, I want to hear that you're on chapter 5. And what I realized was that I didn't need the time to write. I needed the encouragement. I needed somebody to believe in me. And this woman who I had just met believed in me enough to make myself believe that the book was important.
So what was that important book?
That was called Married Women Who Love Women. It went on to, I went through 9 agents, and I finally found an agent who sold it at auction. There was a bidding war on it, and it sold to Doubleday for 6 figures. And it went on to come out in a second edition with Routledge, an academic press, and on and on and on. And it's been an extremely valuable book for a lot of people, not only women, but their husbands, their families,
Absolutely.
who have needed this information.
So this is the experience you're talking in A Writer's Journey about the experience you went through in writing Married Women Who Love Women. So let's go back to A Writer's Journey before the book. What advice do you give to writers about the experience before?
Okay. First of all, network. Collect cards.
Good point.
There were a lot of cards that I collected when I needed therapists, for instance, to interview in the process of writing. I was able to go through my card catalog, and I had written down so-and-so the name, met at such and such a conference, such and such a year, and I was able to call. And whatever your topic is, if it's on dog grooming and you find somebody who owns a kennel, get the card, gather all that information. Wherever I went, I picked up freebies, any newspaper, any magazine that had book reviews. I collected all kinds of information, newspapers and magazines, places where my book might be of interest. Whatever your topic is, again, if you find something that's not totally on your topic, maybe you can write an article or an essay or something, or a letter to the editor and sign it your name with your book, and that again becomes more marketing for your book, and on and on and on.
So you, even before you had written the book, you were gathering the information to say, when it's ready, here's how I'm going to birth it. Mm-hmm. Well, see, there's some optimism in there, Carren. I like that.
Well, the other thing I needed to do was make time to write and find a place to write. I was writing at the kitchen table, and I'd have to clear it away to make dinner and put everything in closets, and I said, this is not going to do. And I live in a small house. And finally, I realized that the book was important enough for me to take some space and say, this is mine. And I took a little corner of the living room, and that's where I write. And I mean, it's very nice. Somebody like Ernest Hemingway would get up in the morning and he'd walk across this little bridge to his studio and write, and his wife would bring him breakfast and then bring him lunch. And when he finished writing for the day, he'd go out with his buddies. And not everybody has that option. Mm-hmm. Many of us work full-time. I was working full-time. Many of us have children and families to take care of. I had to relinquish certain things. I had to relinquish home-cooked meals and go to things that were more simple. But I made these choices because I felt that the book was important. And again, other people will fall into place with you. If you take yourself seriously as a writer, others will too.
That's important. That's an important piece. And while we're on that topic of space being an issue, that is an obstacle. And I know that you talk about obstacles in the book, in addition to having the space to write. What are some of the other obstacles writers face? And I know that there are people in the audience, and I know you're checking off that list, and you're going, it's not just that.
Many times it's our friends and family and negativity. Oh, why do you want to sit and write? We could go out, we could go to a movie, we could go to dinner. I would say make a list of all the people in your life who are negative. Then make another list of all the people who are supportive, who are positive. Don't talk about your writing to anyone who's negative, whether it's in your primary family or your secondary family. You need encouragement and you need support. I say another very important thing is to find a writer's group. Let people hear your work. Let other people read it out loud to you. and listen
Oh.
to your comments.
I like that.
You know, so many times we write something and we think we've written what our mind tells us.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that story, if you take the first letter and the last letter of a word and mix up the middle letters, people can still read it because our minds work a certain way.
Wow, I had not heard that.
Yeah, sometimes you may have the word in here twice,
I do
and
that,
as you're
yes.
reading it, you skip it, but if somebody else is reading it, you'll pick up on it. When I first started writing, I discovered the thesaurus, and I was coming up with all these big words, and as it was read in my writers group, every time a big word came up, they go, no,
No, keep
and
it simple.
it was like skipping down a path, and there were bricks, and they would trip over the bricks because the big words didn't go with the rest of my writing. Originally, I never thought I could write a book because it's a lot of words, and I really don't have a tremendous vocabulary. But what I realized is I could write the kind of books I could read. When I was in college, I had a secret desire of being a writer. And when my first paper was passed back in my English class, I saw all these A's and B's being passed around. And my paper came with a big red letter C on it. And after class, I said to the professor, what can I do to improve my writing? And he said, honey, some people are writers and some aren't, and you're not a writer.
Oh, Carren,
And
how
I believed
crushing.
him, and I didn't pick up a pen for more than 15 years.
Oh,
Anyway, after that, they were filming the movie The Natural with Robert Redford, and I was an extra on the set for
how cool.
almost a month. It was a lot of fun. But every night I'd come home and everybody would ask me what went on. And one day I said to a writer friend of mine, I said, I'm so tired of answering the same questions. And she said, well, why don't you write it down, write a story? And I heard this teacher's voice in my head, and I said, I can't, I'm not a writer. She said, well, just write down everything that happened, and I'll make it into a story for you. And what she did is she took away my angst. And I just sat down. This was pre-computer days. I sat down with a pad and a pencil, and I wrote everything down. And when I brought it to her, she read it, and she said, Carren, this is a story. It's finished. Anyway, I sent it into Women's Day, and they believed, as my friend did, and they published it for their major story. It's called Me and Robert Redford.
Well.
And that's what started my writing career. And the teacher's voice started getting lower and lower until I didn't hear it anymore.
Wonderful.
So don't let anybody ever tell you you're not a writer. If you have something to say and you put it down, you're a writer.
All right. So that concept of negativity from friends and family, that can be very powerful. I know one of the obstacles that came up in another show I did a while back about writing. That was the idea that friends and family who don't know what it's like to write would be the first to call and say, such and such an item is on sale down at the store, and since you're not doing anything, could you go pick it up? And it would be, well, I'm writing right now. Well, I know, but you can do that later.
Anytime.
Because there's no concept of what it takes. So
Right.
there are a number of different obstacles. So let me
Space,
segue back.
time,
space.
economics.
That's a big one.
Before I went to my first writers' conference, I thought about it for 3 years. Do I have the right to take time from my family vacation time? Do I have the right to spend that money on me? And when I finally made the decision, it was life-altering.
Was that the International Women's Writing Guild?
Yes, it was.
Oh, I didn't realize that was the. Okay.
That was the very first one
Okay.
I've ever gone to.
So, and I understand you had an experience there that related to the first book. Tell me about that.
One of the workshop leaders was asking for possible title suggestions, and at the time I was working on an article for Ms. Magazine, and I was too lazy to come up with another title. So I said, well, what about Married Women Who Love Women? And all of a sudden there was a hush in the room, and I thought, oh my God, I just outed myself to these 50 or 60 women, and now nobody's going to talk to me all week. And then one woman raised her hand, and she said, how does a woman make that discovery? And then somebody else raised her hand, and she says, what does she do when she finds out? Then another hand, what kind of men are they married to? How do their children deal with it? What about their families? And I realized that this topic was too big for an article. A book had to be written. And I also realized that if these women in this room had these questions, that women across the country, across the world, would probably have the same questions. And so their questions became my chapter titles. And I speak to a lot of women who want to go the route of self-publishing. And I say to them, if you have something to say, something you're passionate about, chances are a lot of other people are going to want to hear it. So if you can find a traditional publisher, that's the first way to look. And then again, it depends on how thick your skin is. How many rejections are you willing to hear? Are you willing to take before you change your mind and go another route?
And do you have the resources and the time to distribute the book if you choose to self-publish?
Right.
Because the distribution is a key factor when you're talking about
Absolutely.
writing a book. So let's talk about some of the things to know during the writing of the book. So I realized before you need to be thinking about marketing. And you're carving out your time and your space, and you're looking at the economics of things, and where do you get resources, and are you going to get some feedback from other people? So during the book, during the writing, what do people need to know?
Good writing is done to tell, is done to share an idea. It's not done to make us look pompous or important or intelligent with big words. Just say what you need to say.
Yes.
Writing is like Michelangelo said with his carving of David. He says, well, I just had this big block and I took away everything that wasn't important and David was left. Sometimes when you're writing, it's like clearing your throat. You have to put the words down so that you can carve them away and have the words that are really important. If I said to you, she was wearing a beautiful dress, do you know what kind of dress she was wearing? But if I say to you, she was wearing a red dress, a floor-length dress that swirled as she danced, you have a visual of the dress. You may not think it's beautiful. It may be beautiful to me, but not to you. Use the words that are going to mean something. I went to the store. Well, did she go slowly? Did she go resistantly? Did she want to go? Or I ran to the store. Use action. There's a lot of that in this book.
So
Very simple, short suggestions to improve your writing while you're working on it.
And writing is rewriting. I mean, people who think that you're going to write it the first time and that's it, going to send it out the door, no, that never works. So Carren, let's skip for a minute here to the end. The book is finished. After the book has been published, and let's say that you have found a publisher, small press, large press, but you found a traditional publisher. At that point, what does a writer need to know?
You're going to be working with an editor from the publishing house. And while the book needs to come in 100% as perfect as you can make it, years ago publishing houses had more money, more means, more time, and they would work with you to hone in your book. Now there are so many people writing since the computer that they don't do that anymore. If your book doesn't come in looking the way it's supposed to, they're just going to reject it. So a lot of the books that are sent in to publishers never even get looked at. So by doing everything right, at least you have a chance to have your book read. Now, if there are people who have played games, they put a hair between page 70 and 71, and then if they get their manuscript back and they see the same hair there, they say, see, they didn't read my whole book. They don't have to.
No.
Your book has to catch them in the first 3 pages. 3 or 4 pages. And if it doesn't, then you need to think about rewriting. Rejections, if you start getting rejections with little notes on the bottom, it means you're close.
Yes.
I mean, that's wonderful. Don't take it for granted because publishers and editors don't waste their time.
No, they don't.
Unless they think you have promise. If you get 10 or 15 rejections that are just form letter rejections, bring your book to a group. Ask them honestly what they think about it. If you go to family, many times the family just wants to give you validation. And if that's what you want, that's wonderful, but it won't get your book published. You're up against a lot of competition.
Now, speaking of having people look at your book, are you a member of some kind of a critique group or feedback group? How do you get that response?
I met some women through the IWWG, and we do get together, but they live all over, so we only get together a few times a year. And I'm currently starting a critiquing group in Brooklyn. If you go into the IWWG.org, there are all kinds of what they call kitchen table groups. Kitchen table groups started out with women who lived in the city or had small houses or apartments, only had enough room for the women that would fit around their table. So they might be groups of 5 or 6 or 8 women or whatever, men as well. And it's very important to have the feedback from these people. I write with a writer she's a wonderful writer, But when we give critique or feedback, she'll say, no, this is exactly how I want it to be. And that's fine. But she hasn't been published. She only gets self-published because she's not willing to hear further.
You know, that now you bring up an interesting point with that, though, Carren, because one of the biggest themes, I think, in your book is, I would describe it as persistence. And I know that you talk about having passion, persistence, and patience. And so that says to me, there's that idea of, okay, if this publisher rejected it, I'll send it out again, I'll send it out again. But, and I know some people who do that, but there is that little added piece.
You need to be willing to change it.
Yes.
If it's not working, it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
But again, there's nothing wrong with self-publishing. If you have written a book on your family history and you want 20 copies for your family and you're not going to go further with it, that's fine. If you're in the medical field and you're writing a book for a specific group of people, that's fine. You need to know why you're writing your book. Mm-hmm. And I do have a section in the book on the different types of publishing houses and what to look for.
Speaking of the book, I'm going to go back to the book and take a look at that cover in particular. Where did that cover come from? That is gorgeous.
It was an accident. I'm also a photographer, and I was having a problem with my camera, and I was just clicking away. I happened to be sitting at my desk, and I put it on the computer to see if the camera was actually working perfectly, properly. And when I saw this picture, I thought, that's it.
So that's a picture from your desk?
Yeah. That's my mess with my notes.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
That's really nice. I like that idea. Carren, what about advice? Advice for new writers?
Well, you need to start getting a resume together. You need to start getting a portfolio together. And there are a lot of newspapers, they're called adverticals, that don't pay, but they're an easy place to publish stories. When I was first in The Natural and I wrote the story, Me and Robert Redford, I was interviewed on a television station in Buffalo, and they said, well, what made you think you could write? And I thought about it, and I realized I couldn't write for a scientific magazine, but I chose the magazines that I could read, that I enjoyed reading. And I thought, okay, this is the kind of writing I could do because this is the kind of reading that I do.
Important connection. Mm-hmm.
Connection. And it worked. As I said, Women's Day took it. I know that I don't even want to name magazines that wouldn't have taken my work, but that was where I was in my place.
Well, that's part of your marketing research.
But people also need to know, I was in one writer's group, and the instructor, a young woman read, and the instructor said, until you learn to write, and until you get educated and you learn to use the library and you learn to use resources, you can't write. And this woman walked out in tears, and I ran after her and I said, that's not true. She was writing in an authentic voice. It reminded me of the book The Color Purple.
Ah.
Don't let anybody tell you you can't write. It was a mistake I made. I listened to somebody. If you have that passion and you have that desire and you're willing to write and to rewrite and to rewrite, you can do it. There's a story I once heard, and I love it. Man goes up to heaven, and St. Peter says, well, before you come in, he tells him he's a writer. He says, I want to take you down and show you hell. And they go down to hell, and he opens the door, and the writer sees writer after a writer, long rows of writers, and they're all hunched over their computers, and they're typing away, and they're sweating, and they're frustrated, and they're angry. And then St. Peter says, okay, now let's go up to heaven. And he takes them up there, and there are rows and rows of writers, and they're hunched over their computers, and they're writing, and they're frustrated, they're sweating. He says, what's the difference? And St. Peter says, in heaven you get published.
Oh, that's good.
So
that's
perseverance is important. Dr. Seuss, I think he had something like 57 rejections. I have them in here. I don't have them up here. Before he had his first acceptance. If he had stopped ringing doorbells the 50th time, or if he had stopped after 20 times, we'd never have heard of him. J.K. Rowling had her fair share of rejections. Mary Higgins Clark.
Mm-hmm.
So you're in good company when you get those rejections. A friend of mine, when she was 9, she's very precocious, and she wrote a story and sent it to Isaac Asimov magazine. And it came back with a rejection letter. And she was dancing all over the house. She was so excited. And her mother said, "But wait a minute, a rejection letter means they don't want your story." And her daughter said, "No, but a rejection letter means I'm a real writer." Because all writers get rejections.
That's right.
And you have to know it. And you have to.
And, you know, I'm so glad you said that, because I know a lot of people who, good writers, hesitate to submit their work. And when you talk to them more, you find that it's that fear.
Of rejection.
And sometimes they come right out and say it. Well, what if it's not accepted? Well, yeah, chances are it won't be.
Many times it's not about the writing. If you send a recipe to a cookbook, a beef recipe, and it's a vegetarian cookbook, they're not going to use your recipe.
No.
If the magazine uses 500-word stories and you send them one that's 1,000 words, they're not going to take it. Likewise, if you have a 200-word story and they're looking for a 500-word, they're not going to take it. Know your market. This is a very important thing, I think, to share. Read it and be familiar with it and know the kind of work that they publish, because they don't change it. When a person picks up a certain magazine, she knows she's going to see 3 short stories, 2 recipes, 5 how-to articles, whatever it is.
Right.
That magazine follows a format.
I think that's critically important, Carren, and I want to just emphasize the other point that you just made. And as I don't want to be flippant about it, writers do get rejected. We all get rejected. And if you want to be in that community of writers, well, come with your rejections. Yeah, this one rejected me, this one rejected, and that is what it feels like. You can say they rejected this manuscript or this poem or this whatever, but it feels like they rejected me.
Right.
Well, so be it.
We need to have
You can't let that stop you. No. You have to keep pushing forward.
What I suggest to people is have a list of all the places you want to send your work. And when it comes back rejected, pick up your list and send it out to the next place the same day. Don't leave it sit on your desk, because that's depressing.
You know, you have also in your book a number of little exercises at the end of each chapter. They're little exercises you suggest people do. They're very valuable. And one of the ones that I wanted to point out, and we just have 1 minute left, thank you notes. Tell me about the importance.
When I get a rejection letter that has a postscript on it, and with a suggestion or a hint, I send a thank you note. If I'm interviewed on a radio show, I send a thank you note. Because most people don't.
That's right.
So you will stick in the mind of that agent, of that publisher, or of the radio, TV show, whoever interviews you.
Well, Carren, on that piece of very helpful advice, thank you very much for coming from Brooklyn to be on the show. I really appreciate it. And thank you for sharing this book. It just has such useful, meaty, immediately helpful information. I know it's going to be a valuable tool on the libraries of many of the writers out there. And also let me say a thank you to my crew and to also to you in the viewing audience. And I'll close with the words of the fantasy writer Ursula K. Le Guin, who said, "There have been civilizations that did not use the wheel, but there have been no civilizations that did not tell stories. So find your story and find a way to tell it. And do join us again next time. Thank you."
Food for the crew and guests was provided by Manchester Grill of Manchester, Connecticut, and Angelo's Restaurant of Glastonbury, Connecticut. Be sure to send your writing questions and your comments on the book club selection to Zita at page 1, P.O. Box 1515, Manchester, Connecticut, 06045-1515, or send an email to Zita at page1tv.com.